I don't believe that the future is foretold. I know that the future gets created by the decisions that we make in the present. And that is the definition of agency. It means that with every decision, you are influencing a future that's yet to arrive.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Today, we're going to talk about the future. Our guest is the futurist Amy Webb, and I met her 15 years ago when I was a tech reporter at Fortune, and she advised Time Inc., the company that owned Fortune. Her annual Tech Trends report has been on my required reading list ever since. She's one of the most trusted voices in business because more often than not, she is right about the trends that she calls. At South by Southwest, where she gives a talk every year, she is truly a celebrity. Like, people line up around the block for her talk. The most recent one was just this past weekend. Here's Amy Webb. So let's actually start with your most recent LinkedIn post, because I pulled it up on my way to the office today.
Okay.
And you're like, that's like 2 weeks ago. But you are setting the stage for what many people know you for, which is your South by Southwest talk. And you were laying out a theme for 2026. And I think that theme, as I remember it, was creative destruction.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing that makes you shudder. You're like, I don't want that to be the theme for 2020. That feels a little scary. In laying out this term, you stepped back and you said, look, this has happened before. And I thought it might be helpful for us to begin with your explaining what you mean by creative destruction and where it belongs in the history of business.
I studied economics and game theory in college. And one of the classes that I had, we read something called Will Capitalism Survive? Riveting sounding text. It was written in the 40s. So it was challenging. And it was written by an Austrian economist named Joseph Schumpeter. In the post-World War II era, there was quite a bit of innovation and economic development. And in the aftermath of horrifically bad things that happened came entirely new things. So new industries, new technologies, highway systems, things like that. This process in which the old is sort of by necessity destroyed, not just to make way for the new, but because of these external forces that are sort of compounding and pushing the old ways of doing things, the old models, the old tech, everything winds up getting replaced. Now, you can recognize what's happening in advance, and you can bring that upon yourself. So you can invite creative destruction by looking at what's happening, recognizing what must change, what's it time to get rid of, and then invent the new systems and processes and sort of everything else that would be ripe for that new era that's about to dawn. And there was a whole economic argument behind this.
And this was the idea from this text written in the 40s.
It was written, actually, I think it was written in the 50s. But yes, so it was old text.
Yes.
And it dawned on me last year that there are immeasurable forces at play, kind of all happening at the same time, these convergences.
Yeah.
And what really got me thinking about this was there have been moments throughout history when convergences between emerging trends and uncertainties and external forces of change sort of smash into each other. And there's not a single convergence that results, but a lot of them. Yeah. And there have been these sort of convergence cycles throughout history. So Industrial Revolution, obviously, that post-World War II era was another one.
Yeah.
Just as the commercial internet was launching into the dot-com boom era was another one.
Yeah.
And we're in that cycle now. And it's in part because of all the technologies that are emerging, but it's also because huge geopolitical changes have happened in a relatively short amount of time, and social changes are happening, and it's not in one place, it's all around the planet. And it struck me that everybody's kind of missing it, right? They're kind of fixated on one or like small things, generative AI and agentic AI, and it'll be something else AI in a couple of weeks probably.
Right.
They're missing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is we are in a moment of destruction. So you can choose the creative destruction path and engineer your own destiny, whether you're the leader of a company or you're a person trying to figure out what am I doing with my life.
Yeah.
Or that destruction is going to happen at you and you will have no agency in what comes next.
I think that if you are a mere watcher of the news and absorber of current events, you often are made to feel like you have no agency.
Yep. So here's the thing. I don't believe in destiny. I don't believe that the future is foretold. I believe that, and I know that the future gets created by the decisions that we make in the present.
Yeah.
So if that's true, then that is the definition of agency. It means that with every decision, in some way, you are influencing a future that's yet to arrive.
I think sometimes I see how much can change when we really examine our notions around what is fixed around us and what can be flexible that maybe we're not thinking about.
Right. So in my work,
Yeah.
we have things that we know that you have some control over. And then there is a vast catalog of unknowns. So these are things over which no one entity has total control. What I see the mistake almost everybody makes is they forget about the unknown. So that they like catalog, they focus on the things that they have a lot of control over.
Right.
That may not feel like so like a budget.
Yeah.
We worked with a company once. Their financial forecasts were falling apart. They wanted to know why. And we looked at it, math was good, spreadsheets were good, smart people. And we said, hey, did you factor in like weather abnormalities?
Right.
What data are you using to look at weather? And they were looking at like old models, but we've entered a world in which the old models don't predict what's coming because we've got extreme events happening, right?
All the time.
So they had a perfect budget, assuming that they were in a skiff, like in a world where there was no other variable outside.
Right.
And that's just not life. You have to factor in those unknowns.
And factoring in the unknowns gives us what feels like a lot fewer tools for how to navigate in that present. How do you actually plan for a future in which so much is unknown? And I just want to go back to this idea of creative destruction. When you're in the midst of destruction, you can't see what is about to be built.
Except that you can engineer it. The work that we do is extremely research-driven, so it's a lot of research and analysis. We are famous for creating one of the first tech trend reports that existed. Other companies built on top of what we made. It's downloaded a lot every year, and we're no longer publishing it. So we performed our own act of creative destruction by taking the thing that we're sort of most known for and killing it. This is not to say that trends themselves aren't important. They are, but this format doesn't make sense anymore. This is an enormous risk. So anybody looking at us would be baffled that we are going to kill the baby. We're killing the thing that has helped propel us and me, right?
Right.
And it's a deliberate act of creative destruction. So rather than waiting for the market to force our hand, we are getting rid of that. And instead, we have come up with something very different. We're still tracking trends. They are still entry points and components for the bigger work that we do, which are scenarios and planning. But instead, we have a report on convergences that's coming out in March.
So it doesn't actually sound like you've killed the meat of the business in any way, which is essentially trying to discern what the future holds.
In a world where information is abundant.
Yes. And
it is harder and harder to remind people what you do and why you do it. We're not like a 100-year-old company. We're a 20-year-old company.
Yeah.
Those messaging tools matter a lot.
A lot.
So having come from publishing, imagine one of the big storied magazines back in the early 2000s killing off a list.
Right.
Or a feature or, does the magazine go away? No. There's a risk, though, that one of the anchors of that business isn't there anymore, and then it becomes rudderless or whatever it might be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And of course, the magazines you're talking about, the magazines that I've worked for, are mere shadows of what they were even 20 years ago.
Because my point of view, they didn't do what I'm talking about. There was no creative destruction. I mean, that's the entire industry had such a huge lead time to figure out not just what do we do with the internet,
Right.
but now what do we do with AI? And I'm watching publishers make the same mistakes all over again, which is failure to innovate on the business model and potentially get rid of the thing that used to work, but is clearly not going to be working, X amount of time into the future. I recognize that's a hard thing for a leader to do, but leaders who do not do that will find that while they are stagnant and slowly calcify, the entire world has passed them by.
So how do folks make smart bets on the future?
Yeah. So first of all, you have to lead with information, not fear or FOMO. And fear and FOMO right now are the two guiding principles that I'm seeing in most in most organizations. So
and among most individuals as we try to,
Sure. Look, I get it. I'm extremely passionate, and you can be extremely passionate, but you also have to be willing to sit with uncertainty and sort of think the unthinkable and be willing to confront challenging questions with information. I just don't see that a lot. I see, especially with leaders, I'm mostly dealing with CEOs and their C-suites and boards, and very few of them are willing to say, I don't know what you're talking about, or ask questions. So there's a certainty, and then there's rash decision-making because there's a sense that we're too far behind. So you can slow time down, but you have to be willing to gather information and analyze it and think it through.
Right. Gather it, analyze it, and then at some point act on it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is another place I see folks, individuals and companies get stuck.
Here's an easy way to solve that problem.
Yeah.
A rubric. So a rubric is something you might remember from high school if you had a good teacher.
Yeah.
Which was basically, here's how I'm grading and here's the points assigned to each thing. Rubric.
Right.
It is a wise move to have a rubric built in advance of a cataclysmic event happening, because what that allows you to do is score things based on, in a moment of non-crisis, what mattered most to the organization. If you are able to do that, then you don't have to worry about you can be as emotional as you want, but the facts are still going to stand. And that will help you get to a decision point faster, and it will numerically show you that you must take action if a certain threshold is met.
I love that. I want to go back to the end of your letter in which you sort of laid out 10 big ideas. We are living through some sort of near-term shift in the labor force. We felt it last year. A lot of our members felt it last year very personally when they were laid off and had a lot of trouble navigating their way back into the workforce. And when and as they do, they're very different types of roles. And so I was very interested by your notation that we're going to see this rise of unlimited labor, right? And that labor is not going to be the labor of humans necessarily. How do we think about what this might mean for the humans in the equation?
When there's a perception that the economy isn't strong, which is we have a strong economy in a lot of places around the world, but the perception is that it's either not strong or not as strong as it could be, then everybody looks at the balance sheet and they start eliminating headcount if an automated system doesn't have to do better than, forget the better.
Right.
Maybe it's like 80%. We're happy with 75, 80%.
Right.
That's when you see headcount starting to go away. And so that is what's happening right now.
Right.
What's happening is there's been a lot of headcount reduction in white collar work. People who are doing back office tasks or administrative tasks or coding, all sorts of things like that. And these tools are not necessarily better. And I think most organizations are coming around to this idea now, but it is so hard it's so challenging to add headcount back once it's eliminated. So I just think what will happen is these jobs are not going to come back. I don't think.
Right.
It also would require leaders to admit they'd made mistakes, which they're not going to do.
Yeah. Oh, and look, their businesses are under such pressure for the decisions that they made in the last 2 years that even if their ego and their intellect were in favor of making these decisions, they wouldn't be able to.
Right. So how does this net out? It means that overall quality of cognitive work, cognitive output, that ranges from everything from like a call center to customer support to writing things, that's going to start to decline, and we're not Like it is, right? It's
Yeah.
just not as good as it used to be. There's no solve for that. But it also means that there's a pretty big swath of people who are incredibly talented, who should be invited back into the workforce in some way. And the problem is we are moving more quickly toward a world in which there is unlimited labor right now because of cognitive work, but pretty soon there's been a lot of advancements now in robotics that we will start to see that changing pretty quickly too. Unlimited labor feels great. In fact,
does it feel great, Amy?
Well, I think it feels great if you are focused solely on GDP. I don't mean to get super, but I think if you're looking at countries or regions or whatever output, or if you're, again, publicly traded company, you can produce the same amount with half the workforce.
It feels real great when you're looking at your 401k that you've managed to squirrel away, right?
Yeah,
that's where you're seeing it reflected.
So I think on the one hand, there's an argument to be made that unlimited labor, whatever, lifts all boats.
Right.
But the problem downstream from that is that most modern economies around the world are built on labor. Like they require humans to do jobs, to have, that is the structure. We've not been in a situation before where it all sort of works out well to have a bunch of people not doing stuff. And still have an economy grow. For reasons that are obvious, a lot of people want a purpose in life. So just sitting around this universal basic income, everybody will be cool. We'll all go back and learn Renaissance art. That's not going to happen. But the other issue is structural. So in a lot of places, your insurance is tied to your job.
Yep.
Your education to some degree, the parts of being an adult person are very much tied to your employer, and we don't have structures to replace that yet. And things that are at that systems level tend to move more slowly. So we're hitting into this unlimited labor curve, and this how do we reshape structures so that society still works is moving very, very slowly, if at all.
It's to some degree moving backwards, right? I mean, we're watching safety nets evaporate that, the world I grew up in the long ago 80s and 90s took for granted. And employers are the last bastion of a lot of these safety nets, and we're losing our employers. And that will play out. It just will play out. I'm going back to the visual you offered me with your hands, the speed at which the disruption is happening in business, and the speed at which I'm going to put this here, that our sort of our political, cultural, social machine is arranging itself to support the evolution of humans. Those things are not happening in parallel. How do we wrap our mind around the idea of the speed at which the disruption comes at us and how we respond to it?
Respond is the correct word, not react. So I think what happens sometimes, which again, totally natural, you get this, you want to react when really what you want to do is detach and respond.
Yeah.
The best example that I like to give, I grew up in the Midwest, where we had a lot of snow and ice. And when I had to learn how to drive, I had to prove that I could drive on ice. So it was part of our driver's test. I don't know what goes on these days and if the kids still have to learn how to do that, but that's what I had to learn. One of the things that, and you grew up in the Northeast.
I grew up in the Northeast. I also had to learn to drive on ice, and I didn't really need to do it for a couple of decades. And this winter has really given me a new opportunity to practice.
So let me ask you this question for those people who may not have ever driven on ice before. You hit an icy patch. What do? Do you slam your foot on the brake?
You steer into
the slide. So if you hit an icy patch, instinctively, the feeling that we have is to react. And the reaction is slam my foot on the brakes. The car will stop. Everything will be fine.
Yeah.
That's not what you do. You have to respond appropriately. And the response, as crazy as this might sound, is whatever direction your car is whipping itself into, you keep your eye ahead in the distance where you want to go. And then you are steering into the direction that you're sliding. And as you're sliding, you take your foot off the gas, but you're kind of just doing this, right? And you are being responsive to what's happening while looking at where you're going. And ultimately, the car will stop. It is the safe and correct way to proceed. That is a perfect analogy for what everybody should be doing right now.
You know, as you say that, it makes me think about the fact that it feels like one thing that feels materially different to me as a chronicler of business and the rise of tech is that in 2005, when I started doing this, everybody had a vision about the future. And they'd lay it out for you. You'd walk in and you'd be, this is what it's going to look like. And one thing that kind of concerns me is that I feel like in some ways we are letting go of the imaginative principles of the whole thing, that we're not looking up and out and landing on a vision.
Yep. You and me both. Yeah, so we should talk that through. A couple of reasons why first of all, you're absolutely right. In that time period, there was the birth of social media for real. So not just Facebook, but Twitter. And we also had the birth of mobile devices, smartphones, location-aware services. E-commerce was finally a thing. Yeah. So yeah, that the core components of the internet age as it relates to like everyday life were both being born and fun.
Yeah.
Like they were really fun at the time. And there was a sort of joyful exuberance of what the future might be. And obviously we've crested that joyful exuberance. We're on the other side of it now, which feels very much like we're in the, just a cesspool of horrible online.
Right.
And nothing is moving fast. And, we don't have a true vision an aspirational vision for what the future might be. Let me first start by saying that's a normal cycle. It has happened before. We have these cycles of excitement followed, and then usually after the excitement is the fear, and then the everybody's upset that nothing is happening the way they thought it might. And what's happened is we've kind of just settled into, in the tech side of things at least, like the technology that exists. But it's more about pragmatically, what can we build toward?
Yeah.
And we don't have that right now. And I think partially that's because we've had a whiplash effect in a lot of countries, certainly in the United States, and political leadership going from extreme to extreme. And we don't have cohesion around, core tenets of what it means to be a person on the planet right now. And so lost in all of the fray is, we still do have the ability to sort of set our sights on the future that we want to build, but somebody has to articulate that, and then we have to get it together to move in that direction.
Yeah. How much of the technology channels, the disruption of the very communication channels that we might use to convey that vision is responsible for, is a cause for our inability to cohere around a shared vision versus a response to it?
Yeah, look, I would say all 100%.
Yeah.
I'm sure you were one of so I was an original Twitter user. I'm assuming you were too.
2009, South by Southwest.
And the earlier days of those networks, it was a wonderful way to glean from other people. What are they thinking? What are they doing?
Right.
What are they sharing? What are they, what are they reading? 100% get that somebody out there is going to listen to this and say, the olds always say, back in our time, things were better. But there's something materially different right now. And that is there's a capitalistic instinct that propelled us to tweak all of these systems to optimize revenue.
Right.
And when you're optimizing for revenue rather than people, things are going to go badly for most of the people.
Right. You're talking about a time when social was arranged around people's relationships with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't need to add context to that because we had our IRL context. And that IRL context afforded us the joy of discovery when we were together online.
Right.
And we saw a decade ago now, the last of the big social networks just abandon people as the organizing factor around how we got our information and move to more of a broadcast channel.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point. It is not easy on any of these networks to see the things that you signed up to see.
No.
The strategic decisions that drove that are now coming for artificial intelligence. So the systems and tools that the vast majority of people have access to, with the addition of ads into these systems, you can expect more of the same, but even more pervasive, because so much of you, if you have memory turned on, is now a part of these systems. I mean, we're getting like this is going to be sort of depressing for everybody listening.
But let me just follow it through, because for me, it doesn't end on a note of depression, right?
Okay.
So partly that's driven by capitalism and its desire to optimize at all costs, to move us towards a level of efficiency that is no longer good for humans.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that and feel that. But I think that it's a relatively short period in history during which we have sort of adopted efficiency as the language for business success. So we're using that language of efficiency now as we move into this next shift, which is AI. And you have written about the fact that we should not be thinking about AI as an optimization play. That's too narrow of a way to think about it.
Yeah.
Maybe inherent in this creative destruction is the ultimate destruction of this idea that optimization is the point. Maybe there is something after that that's better for humans.
The problem always comes back to the purse.
Mm-hmm.
And for the time being, perhaps for the rest of time, everything comes back to money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And even the optimization piece, if we become habituated to outsourcing so much, whether that is your daily writing or posts or whatever it might be, or even delegating emotions, to a system,
yeah,
your brain changes.
Yeah.
And the creativity that we hope might be on the other end, because now we've got more time.
Yeah.
And we've optimized the stuff that can be optimized for efficiency. And now what are we left with?
Time.
Let's solve problems. Let's do cool stuff. We have no evidence that is going to happen.
Right.
Instead, there's this propulsion towards more efficiency, more productivity, more capital accumulation.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't have to be that way. We just have to make a decision that we want to steer things in a different direction.
That was Amy Webb, CEO of the Future Today Strategy Group. You can find lots of information about her South by Southwest talks in the show notes, and follow her on LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. Thanks for joining me. I'll be right back here next week. Hello Monday is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Ava Ahmadbegi, Rachel Karp, and Adam Yates. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Sound design and engineering by Asaf Gidron. The show is mixed by Tim Boland. Our theme music was composed just for us by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. Michaela Greer is a friend of the show forever, as is Victoria Taylor. Kyle Ranson-Walsh is editor-at-large of editorial graphics. Dave Pond is head of production and creative operations. Courtney Coop is head of original programming. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. I'm Jessi Hempel. This is Hello Monday. See you next week.